Hi, I'm Jordan.
And I'm Doyle. And there's some things that I got to say today. And it's going to be a little bit different than what I've said or how I've said things in our previous podcasts. So, what I want to do is start with talking about some of my beliefs, where they emanate from, where they started from, how they were influenced, and hopefully do it in a pretty concise way. And I would love to hear, the same from you, and then your feedback on sort of where I have arrived at, and share some of that
Sure,
with you too.
sure.
Some key things, right? And I don't want to go back to birth because I don't remember being born, but I presume I was
I
because
was
I'm
born
here.
at an early age.
I was born at an early age. Um, but I do think there are some early aspects and circumstances to my life that I do believe have had an effect on me. Um, my parents married, and I was born right at their first anniversary, or just short of that. So I was a quick child in a young marriage and a young family. Um, Pretty normal, as far as everything I can tell. My dad was in the Navy, and so we traveled a good bit and all over the country. And at about when I was about 10, my dad was over in Vietnam and serving two tours of duty over there, not in battle, but the naval base there in Da Nang and in Saigon. My parents divorced, and that had a huge impact on me emotionally, and obviously it was devastating to my mother, and I had two younger brothers, and I think that had an impact on me, and in a lot of ways. I like to think that in some ways it caused some positive outcomes for me, and in some other ways probably not. I probably have some emotional baggage that even this many years later I'm still wrestling with. But I had to become the man of the house, right? And at 11 or 12 years old, my brothers were 3 and 5 years younger than me, so they were much smaller. I was, 10, and so they were, 6'7", 5'6", 7", something like that. And so I became the man of the house for all practical purposes, and my mother was the breadwinner. Um, and that impacted me, right? Because we had to struggle a lot to get by. Never went hungry, never did without. But there were a lot of things that I had to adjust to. I didn't get to have all the things that I wanted, like what I perceived a lot of my friends and school pals did. And so that influenced me to want to be motivated to do some things. And I learned at an early age that if I wanted something, I had to go earn it. It was had to be a result of my effort. Now I say that, and I'm not a self-made man. I don't claim that. I believe that it takes a lot of people to influence folks as they come along. And I had a lot of positive influences. My mother was one of 9 children, so I had a lot of aunts and uncles around and older cousins, and my grandparents were still living. At least my maternal grandparents were at that point. And there was a lot of positive influences for me, and a lot of good role models that I had. My father was not really that in the picture, so I can't really count him as a role model during those years. But as I got to be a young adult, late teens, early 20s, I had developed quite a bit of independence, and I was a firm believer that a person's efforts should be rewarded. There were rules and things that people would abide by. That's you obeyed the law. You worked hard. You worked for someone that paid you a wage or a decent wage, and if that wasn't acceptable to you, you went and found someone else that would. And it was, you had the freedom to go do that. And I firmly believed in that type of freedom. That as I got older and got more education, I understood more clearly and could define it formally as, that's the role of capitalism in your life, right? You have the right to go do and earn and compensate, and you had certain things that you could own, but certain things that you had to earn and use. Free enterprise. If you didn't like something, you could go start something yourself if you wanted to. All of those things that sort of fed in, and as I went through my higher education and college and such, there were a lot of things I learned, and you have to understand that was a lot of years ago, well over let's say 40 plus years ago. that I was learning these things, and I was learning things that were consistent with the belief system that I had developed over in my life up to that point. And that's how I chose to continue to live my life. How did that manifest in other adult avenues of belief and belief structure? Not trying to get into any kind of social theory. I know in our past discussions we've talked a lot about sociology and psychology and social psychology and individuals and groups and motivation. This is more personal rather than more academic or philosophical. But I was a firm believer in you could make your own way in whatever that meant. Now, were things always fair? No, didn't expect them to be fair. And sometimes you didn't want them to be fair because you didn't want you wanted to have grace sometimes bestowed upon you when you made a mistake or when you slipped and things didn't have to be fatal. And I think the society that I believed I was living in reinforced that to a great extent. Not to say that there weren't some aspects of it that were imperfect, that didn't fit that mold or didn't fit that perspective that I had. I was not naive, I don't think. I mean, maybe to some extent I was, but I wasn't totally naive. I did understand there were evil people in the world that took advantage of other people, but because of how I believe I was raised and influenced and mentored, I was not one that felt that was an acceptable way to be for me and for anyone really, but I chose not to do that. I was raised in and around church and religion. I was raised to believe in God, and I did, and I still do. I also made a choice in my life at the appropriate time, or I say at a time, that I accepted certain principles of faith and belief as truth and believe it. And one of those is that Jesus is the Messiah that came from God, was God incarnate, and to come and provide a path for man, weak, sinful man, back to God. And I don't purport to know what all that means. I don't feel like I have to know what all that means. But what I do believe is that there is something larger and eternal beyond this physical existence and physical life that we have. And so when I weigh all this together, it sort of manifested itself in some adult belief systems that tended to connect in the political spectrum, right? And I certainly am not saying that I am a devout this or devout that on the political spectrum at all, but more, the continuum of belief systems and where they sort of plug into that continuum of politics and what all. I tend to be much more conservative. As I've gotten older, I've tended to be even more conservative. But I'm a firm believer in what the United States, the principles that I believe that it was founded on, and that's freedoms, right? And the protection of those freedoms, not the granting of those freedoms, but the protection of those freedoms. I think those freedoms, as we've said here before and talked about, are bestowed by our Creator, and I firmly believe that. And so I attempt and I try to have everything that I believe measured in context of that structure that I have, and but I also hopefully am humble enough to know that I don't know it all, and that I learn more things that help me not necessarily change what I believe, but it might. If I believe something that's wrong, I want to know that, because I believe that truth is absolute. I don't believe there is such a thing that says your truth and my truth, but unless it is the truth, because truths cannot be in conflict. It might be perspective, it might be perception, it may be what I choose to see and believe, but that doesn't make it true or not. True or not.
It may be the part of reality that I focus on more than other parts of reality.
Sure, and it could be an interpretation of, we can look at something and describe it, and while we're looking exactly the same thing, we can describe it fairly differently. At least if someone else heard that but didn't see it, right?
Right.
And they had to make a mental image,
Sure.
they would interpret the imprecise words that we might choose to use, because in our mind it was clear, but the English language, or any language for that matter, I believe, has an imprecision about it in trying to describe other things,
Well,
right?
the and this is a real aside, but the thing that really I think most people don't realize, or maybe not even acknowledge, is not only is language imprecise and awkward for trying to illustrate what you see or mean or think or feel, just the mere seeing, thinking, feeling, your own internal interpretation is still awkward versus the reality of what it is. And there's a
Sure,
distinction there. And most people think that those are so the same, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I think that the distance between the truth of things and reality and our perception of them, that distance is often far greater than the distance between our perception and our ability to communicate it.
sure, sure. I agree with that. I mean, in just one simple example, trying to describe pain, right? If you go, what is pain? Well, pain may be something different to me than it is to you. And I know the medical professionals, one of the things they do is try to get people to empirically quantify it. On
Right.
1 to 10, well, 7. What does that mean?
Well, what does even the
Right.
pain mean? Because the reality is, to your
Sure.
body, it's a sensation that it's causing, but really all it is a motivator to indicate the desire for your internal automatic systems to have you change something that you're doing. But what
Right.
is the pain? Is the pain that indication? Is the pain, that feeling? Or is the pain the thing that causes that feeling to arise, or is the pain the system that analyzes what's going on to understand it needs to trigger that cause or that thing to that feeling to arise in you? So it's like it gets
Hmm.
really muddy when you start to try to
Sure.
be extremely precise with everything, but
Right.
it's not
And I
useful
think,
ultimately. I don't think most of the time all of that
right.
kind of
That's right.
distinction.
Right. And that's sort of I think summarizes, my point about truth, that there are things that are absolute and they're truth, and if it's not absolute, it's not truth. That doesn't mean doesn't have some validity. I don't mean that. I'm just saying, but there are certain things that are just true, that are just truth. And I think we have to have a foundation of truth that we base things from. Otherwise, we run the risk of having, a very shaky, very weak, very susceptible to destruction set of beliefs and set of perspectives and values. At least that's the perspective that I have. Now, does that mean that if someone isn't the way doesn't think the way I do, that they're absolutely wrong? I can't say that. That's not for me to say. But from a perspective of, and I think this is where people get caught up in this. Well, your truth is this, and my truth is that. They're trying to ascribe truth to something that is not truly truth. It's an interpretation of their perspective, what they see or what they think they believe or what they think is truth. So back to the where I think I plug in, because I think part of why we wanted to have this discussion was to sort of get some clarity and some uh, discourse on why we have been having some of the conversations, and what the context and the content, and even maybe some of the motivations behind it. Um, uh, One of the things that I think, and this has come out of conversations that you and I've had in the past, not necessarily on our podcast here, but um, there are uh, aspects of how we operate and think and feel internally that they get more real once they get out, right? And what that once they're out in discussions and in conversations, or presentations or whatever, they become more real, and then a person can then assess themselves, do self-assessment on that uh, discourse or that discussion in such a way that they can evaluate: is it right? Is it correct? And adjust where they need to adjust. Right. That's how, as we age, I believe this is part of a process of life. When you're young, it's all about pleasure, right? It's all about survival and pleasure. A baby cries when it's hungry or when it's got an issue, when it has discomfort of some sort, whether that's hunger, whether that's a wet diaper, or whether it's whatever, cold or too hot or whatever the case, sick. And as that child uh, ages, it gains more knowledge and more wisdom and more specificity on how to speak or communicate its needs. It knows how better to talk about hunger, knows how better to talk about going to the bathroom, knows more how to communicate about discomfort and pain and other kinds of emotions, loneliness, abandonment, things of that sort that they can react to. And then as one hones that communication and can actually articulate verbally better and more clearly, they begin to gain even more knowledge and hence wisdom. Because to me, is wisdom is the gaining of knowledge and knowing how to apply that knowledge in positive, constructive ways. To the point in time once, and this leads me to the scenario. When people talk about their parents, when I was 5, my dad knew everything, and then when I was 12, my dad kind of got pretty goofy. When I was a teenager, he got to be the dumbest person I know. Then at 25, I began to realize just how smart my dad truly was. And then at 40, I began to realize how wise my dad was and has been all, kind of a thing like that. I'm
Right.
not putting words into my son's mouths on that regard, but just sort of I've heard that numerous times. And they go, yeah, it's amazing how my dad got smarter as I got older. Right. And the reality is that the individual is the one that gained the knowledge and gained the wisdom and the understanding at the same time that the other did too. Right. And I like to think that in my life, I've gotten somewhat wiser because of that I've been open to hear things I didn't agree with. And sometimes I stand toe to toe and dig my heels in on things I disagree with. Um, but I also have know there have been occasions where that was, and I stopped and I backed up, and I had to either, acknowledge or apologize. Hey, I was wrong. I was wrong. I misunderstood that. I had a wrong piece of information, or I overreacted. I was selfish. I was, careless, or whatever the thing was. And those are the kinds of feedback that I think help someone grow. Um, it's helping me. All of this is helping me today in my present state as um, I'm going to say on the verge of hitting senior citizen. Others may say I'm already past that verge, but that's okay. I'm a firm believer that when people say 40 is the new 30, and because I'll say 60 is the new 50, and I'll even go and say 60 is the new 45. So I'm in my late 40s now under that context. I think it's allowing me to look at the world through in a different lens from time to time. Not always, right? Because it's as anyone throughout history would probably say, oh, these are the worst of times, that we live in because of A, B, and C,
Well, that's
right?
everybody's always thought that forever.
Right. And so I try to take that in stride and apply the modicum or the thimble of wisdom that I like to think that I've attained, through this life, and go, it's I can feel that way, I can think that way, and it can have XYZ impact on me, or I can choose to think about things in a different way. And this is another example of that, where what I'm thinking and believing coming out, it gives it reality and strength. So, um, uh, said a whole lot more, spoke a lot longer than I intended to on this particular topic right now, but I wanted to do a zip through sort of the path that my life has gone along in some regards, and the things that I think, and there are probably many other things that I just don't recall right now that did have an influence on the context of my belief systems and what I think and feel. But I think that sort of is a main chord or a main thread that I like to think is a big part of the definition of me. So, what do you think? Does that make sense to you? Do you have anything you want to add from your perspective, or
Well,
questions or pushback on anything I said?
I certainly wasn't there for your upbringing and formative years. Um, no, I think that makes sense to me. I think that it's very clear to me hearing you speak about all that kind of stuff. A lot of the differences between how you felt and thought about life, especially at a younger age than I did, and still do, I think, to a degree. Which is not necessarily, it's not surprising to me. It's also not really new, the difference in perspective, because I one of the things for me is that I'm quite confident at this point in my life that the way that I think and feel about reality, the world, my life, it's very different than most people think and feel about theirs. At least from what I've heard people say, and I listen to a lot of people talk about, where their beliefs come from, where, what they believe, why they believe what they believe, their upbringing, all that kind of stuff. It's pretty clear to me that I feel differently and think differently about those kinds of things than they do, which I think is interesting in and of itself, because there's a lot of usual commonality and there's a lot of divergence between people, or among people
Mhm.
I've heard similar stories from, and I think a lot of perspective on life um, splits pretty early in life based on some perceptions that an individual has about reality in life and feelings that they have about reality in life at a really young age. And then either those get reinforced automatically, because if when left to our own devices, we I think generally have a tendency as a species to have a perspective about how things work and then look for the evidence that that's correct, right? And not
Mhm.
intentionally look for evidence that contradicts that perspective.
Sure.
And so, if when less for our own devices, especially at a younger age, I think we develop an internal echo chamber of sorts. And so I'm speaking very broadly here, but I'll get back around to, I think, your actual questions. But and so I think that that happens, and then there's also the other possibility that there's large influences in someone's life, and so those influences have a degree to which they influence us, and most it's a very shallow degree, I think, and it's maybe some formative stuff, just some uh, vernacular vocabulary that we pick up from people, and that kind of forms a little bit of how we think and feel about things. Um, but some is much deeper than that, right? When you have like real involved role models from an early age and they're very involved in your life, basically they will mold you in a very strong way. And when I say strong, I don't mean you'll end up strong. I mean that their perspective, you will probably adopt most, if not all, of their perspective. And I think that that's useful, and I don't think that that's a bad thing. What I
Right.
think is that it's incumbent upon the individual to realize that that is either one, what has happened in their past, or two, that's what they're going through currently, and just be aware of that and understand how that plays into who they feel that they really are, at their core. Anyway, so that's a little bit of an aside. But going back to your, I don't know that I really have anything to push back on, because I mean it's your experience. I don't think I can push back on your experience. Um, as far as questions, what I would say is listening to it. It was very, I think, I enjoyed listening to it, and I think I picked up some new things that I hadn't necessarily known so much about you. Um, but the questions that I have is, or let me starting it. I feel that you spoke in very general, broad terms about
Mhm.
your upbringing and your I would say formative years, and then just where you've gotten to where you are. And I feel that um, maybe that overgeneralization was a concern of not wanting to be too specific about some of the details, make sense with personal details and all that,
Sure.
but more about your perspective on things and what you actually feel. Because I mean, I know you spoke very similar to in our past episodes where we talk about truth and how that should drive what we do and how we think about things. And you've talked a little bit about that, but I would like to hear a little bit more specifics about what that means to you. Like uh, when you say, we should base what we do off of truth or be guided by truth, have that as a principle. What does that mean to you? How does that translate to the real world? What are some actions that you take that are consequence? What are thoughts that you have, positions that you hold that are consequence of that?
Um, Let me give some personal detail an example or two that will potentially reveal some things, and then I'll move on into what you're talking about, how some of these things manifest themselves in reality and behavior.
Sure.
Um, One of the things I mentioned, after my parents divorced, was my mother was our breadwinner, and she was a high school graduate, but she didn't have any post high school education or any kind of formal skill training. She just worked in food service for that's what she did as a sailor's wife. It was real easy to find a waitress job in different places and make a decent amount of money to supplement what the sailor was bringing in. But after they divorced, it wasn't there. And there were points in time that we qualified for federally subsidized lunches, or free lunches, as they used to be called. And get in the school system was pretty insensitive, not intentionally, I don't think, but they were pretty insensitive in how they did this. On Monday mornings, every Monday morning, you could buy your lunch ticket if for the week if you paid for your lunch there in school, or if you're on the free lunches, they called out the free lunch. Here, come get your free lunch ticket, something to that effect. We qualified, but I never took a free lunch. I never took a free lunch. I either bought my own lunch or I did without, and I didn't do without very often. I found ways to make enough money to be able to afford the lunch. They weren't that expensive. I don't know, 30 cents a day or 50 cents a day.
So where did that decision come from? I mean, that is what age range are we talking about here? Pretty young, right?
It was 12 or 13, right?
Right.
It came from, you have to also understand that divorce was not quite as prevalent and as normalized
Sure.
back in those days, the late 60s, early 70s, as it is today, right? People talk about divorce and families get divorced, and kids have outwardly just become numb to it. But it wasn't that way back in that day. It was still, especially not in the
I will
in the
say
big
they've become
metro
numb to
area.
it. They've become it's standard. It's expected. It's not
Right,
surprising
right.
or not as
I
surprising.
had classmates that it was, whispered around if their parents got divorced, right?
Yeah.
And so it was a shame, right? There was a shame there, but it wasn't a shame, being ashamed of my mother or my dad. It was just and it wasn't that anybody brought shame on me or told me or did anything right directly to me. It was emanated because of that was what I perceived as a societal norm that had been violated there,
Sure.
and that and being poor, right? Yeah, I was poor. I was poor for a long time. I mean, even into early adulthood, I was poor from the standpoint of I didn't have anything except for what came in each week or to get by, right? And there was that fear and shame of being poor and not wanting to acknowledge it, right? Such that I mentioned earlier in my initial comments that we never went hungry, but there were a lot of things we had to do without that we wanted. I played little league baseball in the summer league, and I always had tennis shoes. That's what my mother bought, Sears and Roebuck tennis shoes. So I wore those to school. But you can't really play baseball in tennis shoes, right? And we couldn't afford a pair of cleats, rubber cleats to wear. It's back in the day when you could get deposit for a Coke bottle. I went up and down the roads. We lived out in a rural area. Went up and down the roads because people didn't think twice about throwing empty bottles out in the ditch, and picked up 100 or so bottles and carried them to the local country store. And I got $3.10, or maybe a little bit more than that, but the $3.10 is what the cleats cost at the local discount shoe store. Back before Walmart was around, there was no Walmart. But there was a discount shoe store, and believe it or not, for $3.10, I bought a pair of baseball cleats that I wore until they were the cleats were worn down in nubs, and the soles become disconnected from the leather part of the shoe, or vinyl part. It really wasn't true leather. But I was proud of that, right? I mean, and that sort of taught it. Number one, it taught me to understand the difference between need and want, and then on the wants, to prioritize what you wanted, and then to go do what you needed to do and work for it, or you didn't get it, right? I've never expected anyone to provide a handout for me, to me. And when people have given me gifts, I mean, I mentioned I had, a lot of relatives, a lot of, uncles that were, served as good role models for me, and even other older relatives, male and female. I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college. And you go, that's not such a big deal. I have 41 first cousins on my mother's side of the family with 9 children. So out of my grandparents and all of their brothers and sisters, their 9 children, and all the other grandchildren, I was in the middle age-wise, so there were probably 20 some odd grandchildren older than me, and probably nearly that many as much younger than me. I was the first one to go to a 4-year college, and that was a big deal. And there were times when I would come home on a weekend and I'd see a relative, and he goes, I don't have much, but here's $5. Maybe that'll buy you, a couple of lunches this coming week. Things like that made me very uncomfortable, but I knew where it was coming from,
Yeah.
right? I knew it was an attempt to help and help pave the way. And so you ask about how that affected these things kind of affected my behavior. I'm a firm believer to always help other people, when I can and where I can. I don't believe in charity for charity's sake. That's not what I'm talking about. Just, this person says they're in need. I'm talking about prudent help for people that have a need. Never want to let anybody go hungry. But I'm a firm believer in, I will help anyone I can, but I'm going to help you help yourself. Under the principle of you give a man a fish, he eats for today, and you teach him how to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. And that's sort of a value proposition that I've tried to embrace. And as I've gotten older, the help I've gotten to where I was a lot more, a lot less, I should say, uncomfortable with accepting help, right? And understanding the positive aspect of it, right? And in terms of, like, all the jobs that I've had and the careers that I've had, through my adult life, I can't think of one where it wasn't influenced by someone willing, for no benefit of their own, they were willing to help me, right? And sometimes it's because they knew me, but sometimes it was because, number one, they were just good people and they might know of me. I grew up back in the day when you were identified by your relatives, right? In the country, in the rural areas, that's what it was. Oh, you're so-and-so's grandson. Yeah, I know him. He's a fine man. Or, you're so-and-so's your mother. I remember her. She played basketball in high school back when we were growing up, or, things like that. Those kinds of connections that a lot of kids today don't get to experience. And there's a lot of good connections too that people make today. But now, as I've gotten into my older years, more mature years, let's say, I see the value and the impact of doing that, of paying it forward, and doing things for the right reason. And you talk about, the other things that I was talking about. How does it affect what I do? I don't think that it's right for the world and I'm not talking, this is not anything on the political spectrum at all, and people might want to try to pin it somewhere, but that's not my point. My point is, I don't think it's right for the world, for the inhabitants of the world, to look to someone else to do for them. What I think it's right for the people of the world to do is do everything they can, and then those around us look and see how we can help those that might benefit, that might be, doing everything that they can within their power, and they just need a little extra help to make that next step, whatever that is. Because I can tell you, there is a tremendous amount of pride, and I know pride can be, a negative emotion, but a feeling of accomplishment, right? And I guess that's why, this whole thing about being uncomfortable with people helping and giving, and going back to the free lunches. Uh, I didn't want to owe anybody anything, right? And that sort of was the sense of how I rationalized that. And as I've gotten older, I see it less like that, like, well, I owe someone, and more like, good, this enables me to do this for someone else, or do something like this for someone else, and paying it forward. Now, this is where I think it does get a little political, because I think it paints me more clearly in a certain spot on the political spectrum. I don't believe it's government's responsibility to provide jobs, to provide value, to provide security for people. I think that's their responsibility.
That only has a political implication because you use the word government, right? I think what you
Sure.
and this was where I will push back on you, because I think what you really mean, because I feel like I know your heart here, is that it's not other people's. It shouldn't be the expectation that it is other people's responsibility to do that, right?
Correct.
Because government
that
is
is
just a word for other people. And that's
Yes.
part of my perspective, is that government
Sure.
means nothing but just other people. And just to kind of, I don't want to hijack your story here,
No, that's fine.
but the way that I view what you're talking about, that same scenario, because I have similar perspective to it. I don't think it's identical perspective, but a similar perspective. But the way that I view it is that the idea that you're trying to get across is that it is everyone's responsibility to do whatever is within their power to help those around them. And it is not prudent to expect that other people will do that. Because if you expect that other people do that, what's to stop everybody else from expecting that other people will do it? And then no one wants to do it, thus no one does it, except for the people who will take on that responsibility. But then you care about it being done so little that the people who volunteer that know that you're not going to look at it because you don't care. So they will take that position to be able to do whatever they want, in addition to the guise of helping other people, taking care of other people. That's the way it plays out in human behavior. Forget about politics, forget about government and all that. That's how it plays out in human behavior. And I think that's really what I feel like is more accurate accurate to your perspective than to say that it's just government, because it's not necessarily just government. Sure. Right? It could be charity organizations, because charity organizations can do the exact same thing, right? And have certainly, right, very clearly have. Yeah. So anyway,
you're right. You're right that I painted it more on the political issue, because that's how it manifests. Because here's how I distinguish.
It's not how. No. I want to push back against that too. It's not how it manifests. It is the popular perception of how it manifests. It manifests in human behavior, and then government is one of the the large array of tools that people who manifest that kind of behavior grab onto to leverage that negative behavior to greater and greater degrees.
Yeah. Absolutely. What I was really trying to say, though, was how it manifested in my discussion here. I didn't mean that, it manifested. Sure. Yeah, is how it came into my part of my discussion was was the quickest way that popped into my mind on how to articulate that. You did a much better job, and much more, comprehensive and accurate and thorough job.
But I think it's important, right? Because and this is a large part of my perspective, and I don't know if we'll have time to get to it this episode, maybe next episode. But a large part of my perspective is that because language is so important, this kind of ties back into what we talked about maybe last time or the time before, where when we think, we conceptualize it as us talking to ourselves. And so the same mechanism that we use to communicate to other people, when we try to communicate to ourselves, we use that same mechanism. Thus, we subject ourselves to the same flaws, but in two directions: in the outgoing direction of the imprecision of the talking to ourselves, and then the imprecision of the reinterpretation of it when we listen to ourselves. So what we do is, when we do that, is we get in really bad mode of pushing ourselves even farther from our true intentions. Not only that, there are people that know that this happened, and people that know that this happens in individuals, and they take advantage of that to try to instill new language to make people always think about things in certain terms. So thus, if you always think about it in those terms, you're always continually forever pushing yourself and your position and your beliefs farther and farther and farther and farther away from your true intentions. And that's where things like politics, government, all of that kind of crap, and I'll say it as crap, is why it's why all those things are crap and are a problem, is because those are the mechanisms that people with really bad intentions use as those tools to pry our actions and our beliefs away further and further from our pure intentions. And that is the big underlying evil. And I say the quotes, but it is evil. The underlying evil of all of this stuff that's, when we're talked before about, agenda, narrative, framing, and all of that. Those are the conduits, the media through which these evil people with evil intentions are asserting these tools, or applying these tools to pry our beliefs, perspectives, and actions farther and farther away from our true pure intentions. And I think most if not all people, have true pure intentions at their core. They've just been pried so far away from that they're not aware of it. Right.
Which that is a great connector to the discussions we've had over the past weeks leading up to where we are today. Right. And in this, somewhat of a revelation of our belief structures, or at least today is my belief structures, and a peek into some of yours, and how they are even potentially susceptible to the imprecision of language, and even internally, as you were describing. So,
well, they're always susceptible to that, and it's always a pitfall. So our goal must be to reduce that as much as possible. We'll never eliminate it, but in the way that you reduce it is you become aware of it. You look at it. You inspect it at as deep of a level as you possibly can, and you hold the intention of why you're doing that. And you're not doing that to manipulate further, right, and to coerce other people to your perspective. It's so that you understand that difference between what you're telling yourself versus what you really understand to feel and believe.
So, doctor, is my session on the couch up today? I feel like I've been in because I've been sort of, revealing some fairly deep stuff.
Sure.
And obviously there's much more to me than that. But I just kind of wanted to paint sort of a significant branch of my belief systems, and the things that I think, and I could be wrong in some respects. There could be other things that affected me that, more significantly, that I didn't bring in. But I do believe the things that I alluded to are some pretty significant core foundational blocks that affected the belief structure that I have today. And I'm curious, and probably next time, how you would describe sort of how you got where you are, because I know we've chatted on numerous occasions that I think you have a clarity of your belief, and a resolution of your beliefs that I think is extremely admirable and compelling. right? And I, I've admitted that many times I've learned things from you, learned a different perspective that's caused me to change some of the perceptions and the interpretations of things that I believed or I thought I believed, and to refine them, and in some cases, adapt them. But nothing that I think is contested what I believe is truth. You know what I'm saying? Because
Sure.
that's I'm resolute about that. Now I could be mistaken on certain things, but I haven't seen things that I've held on to as truth that are in conflict with what I've experienced myself, and then what I perceive from you. So, um, you think this is a good time to schedule our next session
Yeah, I think so.
and, and go from there, and swap positions? You get on the couch, and I'll be in the leather chair with the cigar. I mean, with the pipe rather. Um, Being tongue in cheek,
Of
I don't
course.
really feel like you were performing therapy. I just felt like that I was the one, on the psychiatrist couch, revealing, um, and to a small degree of catharsis, right?
Of course. Oh yeah.
Somewhat.
Well, that's
So,
why that's a large percentage of why in actuality that happens, right? Is because so much of the contortions that we go through as humans are because we just haven't been able to speak how we feel, and that's why talk therapy like that is a real thing, and it's literally what we're talking about here, right? Is that it's this
mhm,
disconnect between who you feel that you are and you want to be, and all of the things that you say and that you think, and all of the um, entities that you allow to hijack that and pull it away from you and take it for their own ends, whether good or bad, right?
yeah.
So, but
So,
yeah, I think
so
so. I look forward to the next conversation for sure.
indeed, indeed. So, yeah, I look forward to it as well. I'll put my listeners on, and hopefully learn a lot, and hear what you've got to say
Sounds good.
next
All
time.
right. Well, I appreciate you taking the time, Doyle.
Indeed, my pleasure.
All right, we'll see you.
All right.